Hello, everyone, again. It's John Alterelli with Terraverse TV. We're going to have a good little session today on an interview that Anderson Cooper did with Professor Scott Galloway, who I'm a pretty big fan of, although we don't agree on some things, but I do like him. I think he's good. I like both of them, actually. But they had some thoughts about how the election went, what were the causes of Vice President Harris's loss to Trump, and I want to go through some of those, and Jenna's going to be on with us. Say hi, Jenna.
Hi, everyone.
And we're going to talk about some of the things that Professor Galloway says, and I'm going to fact check him with some stats. So why don't we roll the clip?
Elon Musk might have when President-elect Trump returns to the White House. He was one of Trump's biggest financial backers. His pro-Trump super PAC spent nearly $120 million on the campaign, which got the attention, of course, of Trump supporters who cheered his name when the president-elect gave his victory speech early yesterday morning.
Who did you say? Oh, let me tell you, we have a new star. A star is born, Elon.
The president-elect hailing Elon Musk. Perspective now from Scott Galloway, professor of marketing at New York University Stern School of Business. Scott, in terms of Elon Musk, how much influence do you think he's going to have in this administration?
I think he'll have real influence, mostly on his own companies. I don't know if he has the time or the inclination to get involved in real kind of government reform, but I think he'll have a pretty heavy hand when it comes to regulation.
You said before the election something that I think is really prescient and important. You said this election is going to be decided on who presents a more aspirational vision of masculinity. Donald Trump doubled down on young men, really focused on reaching out. Elon Musk, I guess you could see as sort of part of that. But can you just talk about that idea of who presents a more aspirational vision of masculinity, and why that is so important?
Yeah, everyone thought this election was going to be a referendum on women's rights. I would argue this was a referendum on who presented a more aspirational vision of masculinity. Elon Musk is sending satellites into space, building cars. He's magnificently wealthy. He's provocative. He's entertaining. I would argue he's probably the most aspirational role model for most young men globally, even if you think that's healthy or not. So in addition, the right, Trump, to his credit, embraced the manosphere. I would argue this was the manosphere election. Anderson, he went on Alex Schultz, Joe Rogan, Lex Friedman. He basically went on the biggest manosphere podcast, and it was the smart thing to do. Let me give you some numbers. The Joe Rogan interview of Donald Trump got 40 million views on YouTube, approximately 15 million downloads. That's 55 million people saw Donald Trump for 3 hours. That's more people, or about the same number of people, to watch the entire World Series. If you were to try and get that same audience on cable television, you'd have to go on this and every other primetime cable news network every night for 2 weeks. This was not only the manosphere election, it was kind of the podcast election, but going all in on this more aggressive, provocative, I'll put money in your pocket, I'll get you out of your parents' house, I'm all about the economy, I'm not as worried about social justice issues, I'm a little bit irreverent, I'm aggressive, I'm provocative. Boy, it resonated. This was kind of the, simply put, I would argue this was more the testosterone election than it was a referendum on bodily autonomy for women.
And you're saying this, by the way, as somebody who publicly endorsed Harris. You were critical of the campaign of the Democrats' efforts, if there were, to specifically reach out to young men.
Well, Anderson, you were at the convention. There was a parade of every special interest group. There were no young men. There was no acknowledgement of the group that has fallen further faster than any group in American history over the last 20 years, and that's young men. More single women own homes than single men. Women are making more money in urban centers under the age of 30, which I think is fantastic. But here are some grim statistics. Young men are 4 times more likely to kill themselves, 3 times more likely to be addicted, 12 times more likely to be incarcerated. Only 1 in 3 men under the age of 30 is in a relationship. 1 in 3 live at home. 1 in 5 30-year-old men live at home, whereas 2 in 3 women are in a relationship. So what do you have? You have a bunch of men who are not engaging in work, not engaging in relationships, not engaging in school. Them and their parents feel it. And if you look at the polling results, the group that swung most aggressively towards Trump, other than Latin men, was young people 18 to 29. And the second biggest demographic by age that swung towards Trump was people aged 45 to 64. And my thesis is that that is their parents. Social justice issues and what's going on in Ukraine take a back seat when your son is in the basement vaping and playing video games and can't find a job.
And yet, you've pointed out that you believe in the Trump administration, it's likely there would be a tax increase for young men.
The Harris campaign was unable to expose a basic economic truth, and that is deficits, which have been bad under the Biden administration, but under the Trump administration versus the Harris economic plan, the deficits are going to be triple. And it's great for you and me, Anderson, because we own homes and we own stocks. And the stimulus of that deficit spending will take the value of our stocks and our real estate up. But our kids are going to have to pay that back at some point. And they're facing inflation and possibly mortgage rates of 15 to 20%. So all deficits do is take the credit card of youth, run it such that we can have champagne and cocaine in the club. Deficits are nothing but delayed taxes on the young. And the Harris campaign was not able to square that circle for young people. The largest tax increase in history is about to happen vis-a-vis a massive increase in deficits from Donald Trump.
I know you were speaking metaphorically, I think, about the club stuff. Scott Galloway, appreciate your time.
Take a few of these issues. He said a lot there. Some of it is accurate, but unless you really paid attention, he wasn't talking from any factual basis on either inflation or deficits or tax, any of that. He's projecting that might happen under Trump, which is what they're all doing, because they can't actually go with what the facts are. And I'm going to give you those in a minute, okay? But I want to take a couple of things off the top. One, he said that over the last 20 years, this group, this young male group, had the worst. They suffered more than any other group. Well, spoiler alert: 16 of those 20 years were, guess what, under Democrat rule, and they did better. The only time they did better was, guess what? Spoiler alert: under Trump. He had the best jobs rate around, okay? So at the end of the day, and when I get into the rest, he had the best inflation, he had the best deficit. Everything he did was better than the Democrats. And how they could blame him when his record actually already wins against the last 16 of the 20 years under Democrat rule. So thank you, Scott, for telling us how bad these guys are, but why don't you put the blame where it belongs? It isn't Trump. Call your own people out on that stuff. What did they do in the other 16 of the 20 years that were so helpful to these young guys, okay? Then he was talking about, so that one just kills me. So what do you think about that, Jen, before I jump to the next one?
I like to blame women, so
okay.
That's kind of my thing. I agree with you. I don't think it's Trump's fault that men are suffering. I think it is democracy, and I think it is the whole wave of feminism that started that is like a cancer on our country. And yeah, it's unfortunate that women have like become hyper masculine, so they tend to do a lot of things without men because they had to like prove something, I guess. Like they were like, no, we don't need no man, and then like they got to a place where they really don't need a man. And as you and I have talked about, and this may be going a little far off topic, but there's a lot of women that became lesbians because they had like bad experiences with men, or they were just like, I'm swarting off men. And women can have children. Now, today with technology, you can have children without a man. I mean, you need the sperm, but they can artificially inseminate you, IVF. And women have just become... It's great. Like, I'm not like knocking women for being powerful and like being able to like start businesses, and like that's really awesome and that's inspiring, but you can do that and still also it could still be fine to need a man. I don't know why there's like a weird stigma if I were to say like I need a man. Like I do. Like I do need a man. So I don't think that makes me weak. And I don't think you can't need a man and also be a powerful woman. So that's my That's my theory.
Yeah, I mean, as a man, I don't have any problem admitting that I need a woman. So I don't know what the issue is here. You know?
I think people just have issue. Like, I think when you say you need something, it makes you seem weak, and I would highly disagree. I think hyper independence is weak. When you can't admit your necessities, I think that is weak.
Yeah, I hear you. All right, let's talk about the manosphere and how and the social media displacing the sort of news media. So
Like the podcast.
Yeah, the podcast.
Yeah.
So he said that, Joe Rogan, this number, that number, that you'd have to have all the news stations every night for 2 weeks to meet that up. Well, they have all the news stations every night, every week. They've had it forever. Can you believe that was the analogy or the comparison you made to one Joe Rogan podcast, 30 million views, versus the night after night after night after night of the left-leaning news media pounding and pounding and pounding to suggest that there's a far more availability on the right than the left on the media is crazy. Now, what is clearly happening, and thank goodness, is people like Rogan and all of these independent content creators, including you and me and others, who are exposing the left for their fallacy and their baloney, and that people are now saying, I don't want to believe what I'm hearing on the news. I'm going to believe what the truth is. People are out there willing to give me the truth. Yeah, it is changing, and we're disrupting the mainstream left media, and that's a problem for them. What, they can only live if they have hegemony over media? I mean, it's ludicrous, and this is the kind of whining that we hear from the left all the time. And I was surprised by Scott that he's a marketing professor at NYU. He's a brilliant guy. He's really smart. He knows what he's doing. So either he's doing it on purpose, or he's also drank the Kool-Aid and has become, so caught up in his own political views that he can't even look at the facts objectively. And I'm going to get into that when I get into the stats that he's talked about, which he was dead wrong on, and I'm going to point them out. So that was the next one. What did you think about that, Jenna? You're in this battle now with me, right? And you're facing your own personal battles in this sphere. What's your view on this whole media thing and social media and the manosphere and all that?
I think let's take even just news aside. Social media gained people's attention very much so during the pandemic. I think it was for a lot of people, it was a creative outlet. People were literally in their homes and they can start, creating things. I know a lot of fitness influencers they couldn't train people in person, and there were so many live classes every day on either Instagram or TikTok and then YouTube, and then people started, if you couldn't go out and have a business, you started to work from home, and you can have a business from home and I'm just saying, let's put being a new reporter or a newscaster or a podcaster aside. You could, start a yoga thing, or you could do online courses. So the wave of social media took over and grabbed our attention during COVID. And I think it's been also an amazing thing. Now, it's been happening since COVID. Even although Netflix I think their stock did go up highly during COVID. Post-COVID, it's people don't even actually do Netflix as much. I think people are on YouTube and Rumble and TikTok, maybe Instagram, maybe not so much Instagram as those three. They're really on those so much more than even sitting and watching a movie. Because also, what's really kind of interesting is someone's attention span. Let's say you're on TikTok, you're scrolling through 60-second videos, or you're on a podcast and it's kind of a little bit more stimulating than sitting and watching a movie, because you're maybe listening to two people talk, or they put up clips and it's there's always something changing on it. So I make those points to just say that social media has been grabbing our attention with or without news. Now, I'll add in the news portion. Yeah, there's censorship, and there is people that are creating news reports, and what the media is putting out there, they're curating it. And I think people got tired of having things specifically curated, so they started to do their own research, and people are news reporters, really. That's kind of what it is. People are finding their own research, finding the facts, and now reporting on it. And they're extremely trustworthy, and they've built not only huge followings, but people really like these people on a personal level. Someone watches Joe Rogan and you feel a little bit more connected to him than Anderson Cooper, let's say. There's they break I don't know, YouTube kind of breaks like this fourth wall that for some reason a news reporter has, like, you know, the way they talk is very like pristine, and they're a bit more performative and less organic than I think what a podcast is today. So I think that's why also a lot of people tend to maybe also trust these podcasters more, because there's something more authentic about them. So
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, look, clearly I'm not polished like these newscasters. I had no training in broadcasting, so I know I'm just fumbling around. But what I do well, and I think I'm happy to stack up against anyone, is I go dig up the facts. You know how much time I spend on this, Jen, and I don't just like kind of, you know, look to support my bias. I have no idea what the facts are until I go pull them up. I don't make my opinion until after I see what I have. And a couple of things he said, and we're going to jump into the facts. I don't want to keep this too long. I mean, these facts are so startling that it's ridiculous to even hear what people have been saying all along here about Trump versus the Democratic control during both Biden and Harris and Obama and even other presidents. So he said, for example, that, they're going to be facing 15 to 20% interest rates on housing. Well, guess what? I know Scott's not as old as me, but he should be old enough to remember in the Carter administration, we had the worst stagflation in history. We had interest rates, because I bought a house then, I bought it at 18, and I think they peaked at around 21%, okay? Inflation was through the roof, jobs were down, unemployment was up. Everything that could go wrong went wrong under President Carter. He was a good guy. I voted for him. He was horrific at running the economy, and he almost ruined it. If it wasn't for Reagan to save us, which is what I hope that Trump becomes the next Reagan. I don't know if he's as good as Reagan, or he's certainly not maybe as articulate, and maybe not as, you know, some of his morality may not be as good as Reagan's, but he's certainly on the right track when it comes to fixing the government, which is what Reagan did. Reagan had the best tax policy ever. He was the guy, 1986, that changed the entire tax code, got rid of all these loopholes for passive income, and he did a great job. It cost us something, because we ended up having a very bad banking crisis in the sort of there was a bunch of banks that used to just loan for real estate, and they got crushed because when he got rid of that loophole, all of this overbuilding in like mini malls and strip malls and all that went away, because the doctors and lawyers who were using that passive income to offset their income could no longer do that. And they had an abundance of these overbuilt things, and they had to get rid of them. It took time to work it off. And all these banks that were in there, all these defaults, they all went out of business. I think it was a Federal Home Loan Association type banks. I forget the exact name of them, because they're all gone now. There was like 14,000 of them. They're all gone. And that took a little while to work off. But since then, we've had a more rational building policy. And the only time it gets out of control is when the government puts incentives, like they did in the last crisis, to lower the loan criteria, such that people were buying houses at 100. They were getting 105% of the loan value of the house, and they didn't have to have any income. I mean, it was ridiculous. And that was all done by Fannie, Freddie, and HUD, quasi-government agencies. It wasn't the banking system. They forced the banking system to go down that path because they lowered the standards, and they are the ones who take all the loans. All the banks have to underwrite to their standards. So it's the government that causes these problems, not the system. Now, or not the private sector. So the other thing I said about that the Carter years, one more point, and I hate hearing this, I just annoys me. Every time they talk about Trump, they mention some billionaire. Mostly now it's Elon Musk. He's become the poster boy for how the Trump is beholden to the billionaires. I already told you on one other podcast that twice as many billionaires, like 80 to 40, something like that, billionaires supported Harris compared to Trump. And that doesn't include all of the other sports stars, the almost billionaires, and all the other people. She raised $1 trillion. She outraised and outspent Trump. Where did she get that money? And what she did with that money, not only that, was horrific. She paid $1 million to Oprah, not to Oprah, but to her company for the endorsement. She paid a ton of content creators on the social media platforms to tout her stuff. She bought media, okay? Not just, putting by her own advertising. She made people make it like they were for her, and she paid them to say that for them. That never comes up, okay? But you talk about Elon Musk. So Elon Musk put $120 million into Trump's campaign. Well, Bill Gates put $175 million into Harris. I don't hear anybody complaining about that. It's just ridiculous. Okay, so let's stop talking about a couple of billionaires here and a couple of billionaires. They all have their billionaires. And clearly the left has more than the right. So if they're the party of the billionaires, I'm tired of hearing this, okay? So now, Jen, I'm going to get into some facts here before we wrap up, because these facts are just something that completely get ignored. No one wants to talk about the data between Trump and Biden, and it's all here, okay? So I'm going to give you some. Let's talk about the total amount of inflation under Trump and the total amount of inflation under Biden-Harris. And it's important to talk about the total amount, because just because it goes down one year or another year, if it went up 10%, it stays up 10%. There's no going down. We don't have deflation. It's called inflation. So if you had 10% raise last year and it goes up another 2%, now you're up 12% over the 2 years. If it goes up another 3%, now you're up 15%. And it's actually compounded, so it's actually a little more. So here's the real numbers, okay? So during Trump's entire 4 years, the total cumulative, 5.6%. He had 2.1 in 17, 2.4 in 18. It went down to 1.8 in 19 and down to 1.2%, one of the lowest inflation rates we've had probably in 40 or 50 years. He gave Biden the lowest interest rate coming in 21 at 1.2%. Total, 5.6%. I'll just give you a little teaser here. 2 of the 4 years under Trump were in excess of that, just individual years. So over the 4 years of the Biden-Harris administration, and I know some of this will have to be attributed to COVID, and I'll give them that, some of it. But we'll get over this because it's not COVID, okay? Because it's 4 years. COVID wasn't all 4 years. And part of the COVID was in the last year of Trump's administration too. And his inflation went down there in that year in 2020. So 20.5%, Jen, it's 4 times. It's 4 times higher.
Yeah.
4 times higher.
Yeah.
Over that period. And then they wonder why people are saying things are bad. Oh, but inflation's come down. Bullshit. 20% over 4 years. It's ridiculous. It's one of the highest since Carter. Okay? Of course.
Wow.
It doesn't go down, Jen. So now just think about it. From when you were out in 2021 to now,
Yeah.
everything you have is over 20% higher. And it's going to go up next year, even if it goes up 2 or 3%. And the next year, it's never going to get below. So over a 4-year period, 20% is incredible. And of course, people are hurting. Prices aren't going down. Let's be clear. That's what they keep saying. No, they're not going down. The rate of increases is going down. That's the difference. You need to understand inflation. People don't get it, okay? It's the rate of increase. So what? It's slowing down. It doesn't matter. You've already done enough damage. So he's had 2 years, 7% in the first year, 6.5% the second year, 3.4%, and now 2.4%. Yeah, it's coming down, thank God. But it's 20% over the term, okay? And yes, I'll give him some credit for COVID for the first 2 years, but we're going to get to that too. And then what was the highest, like, sort of quarterly increase? It was in 2022. They had a 2.6% in just 1 quarter. And then the highest rate period over the period was in June of 2022. It was 9.1%. Incredible. Incredible, okay? That's some of the stats on that. Now let's talk about spending, because that's where, where Scott said, oh, the budget deficits, the spending is what's going to create inflation, which is true, because you're going to see the spending numbers correlate right to inflation. And guess who did the bigger spending and the bigger inflation? Biden-Harris, not Trump. So how could you extrapolate from what he already did to suggest that he's going, that somehow her plan, I don't even know what the hell her plan was. Do you know what her plan was?
No.
She never gave us a plan. So, of course, if you're going to compare Trump's plan to her plan, it's, she's at 0 because she had no plan and Trump had something, right? Whatever it was. How could you extrapolate from that and suggest that Trump is going to create these huge deficits, huge spending, and the like? It's just, that is blatantly false. It has no basis in fact. It's pure speculation. And guess what? I can't wait 4 years from now when we're sitting here, hopefully I'm still alive, and we'll be going through these facts, and we're going to show these people. I'm going to bring these clips back, and we're going to remind people of all the baloney that they said, and then it doesn't come true. So let's talk about tax revenues. And by the way, Trump passed a tax decrease. And tax revenues, as they always do, go up. Just contrary to what the left says over and over again. Raise taxes, it may go up, but it costs the economy, and overall it goes down over time, and it goes just the other way when you lower taxes. It increases stimulation, economic growth, and it's always been better, always. That is a known economic fact. Everyone who really is honest about economics knows this. And yet, of course, because we have the left in academia, we have the economic pundits that they put on TV, they all will sing the same song. There are good economic professors out there, there are good economists out there that will tell you the real story. And the real story is tax decreases typically will increase revenues over time from taxes because you're going to have growth. And that's been the case forever, okay? And we can go through that and fight this battle over and over again. I pulled these stats up so many times, I'm so sick of it. But let's just talk about these 4 years. We have two 4-year periods to compare apples to apples, okay? So total tax revenues in the first year, and over the 4-year period for Trump were $13.53 trillion, so $13.5 trillion. And his spending was $19 trillion. So he had a deficit over that period of $5.5 trillion, okay? Now, part of that, again, was that last year. Most of that 5.6 was in the last year of his term because that's when they put that, when COVID was in place and they had that first big stimulus package, which I wasn't in favor of it, but they did that. And that's where almost all of his deficit, because he was running very small deficits. The first year he was running less than $1 trillion, 0.66, 0.78, 0.98. He was under $1 trillion in deficits for the first 3 years. All of his increase came in the last year, in the COVID year, of $3.3 trillion, and that was all due to the CCC and all PPP and all those other plans that they put in place. That was all stupid, and it cost us a ton. It didn't do anything, okay? He fell prey to the whole push that everyone was pushing on that. I get it. He gave into it, and he probably regrets it, but it happened, and it was one of those things. Now, when Biden got in, here's what he did. It went from He did increase taxes, revenue did go up. And by the way, that's not surprising because they had been going up every single year since Trump put in that tax plan. So Biden got the benefit of the tax cut on tax revenue because he did not put in any corporate changes to the tax rates at all. He talked about raising the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28. He didn't do it. He talked about raising income on the tax rates on the top income earners from 37 to 39. He didn't do it. He talked a good game, but didn't do anything. He had no tax changes. So all of the tax revenue increases that came over his 4-year period came from Trump. Okay, because if he had changed something, then we have something to talk about. He didn't. These are all from Trump. So what did he get? He got tax revenues of 18.85, $500 billion, $5 trillion more than the Trump years, and he got, but he spent $26 trillion, $7 trillion more. So he spent more than all of that great revenue that Trump had gotten him. He spent all of it. And they end up running up another deficit, $7.2 trillion deficits over that period, which is that they had a $1.6 trillion difference between what was raised in taxes and what was spent. Okay, and by the way, every single year of Biden's administration, his deficit was higher than all but the 1 year, the last year, the COVID year of Trump. They were at least double, if not triple, all of the years that Trump had. And the spending, once it got up to $6 trillion, under Trump, his first 3 years right around $4 trillion, which was the right number for our budget because we were running almost an even budget versus revenue. We were less than $1 trillion of deficit, which means that we were spending about slightly more than we were raising, which is what you're supposed to do. So the first 3 years pre-COVID, Trump was on track to keep us almost at a balanced budget. Then he went up and they spent all that stupid extra $3 trillion. And guess what happens? This is what happens to government. Once you get your budget, they don't go down, they go up. So instead of getting rid of the spending that was for COVID, the $6 trillion now instead of the $4 trillion, and now up to $7 trillion, he was at 6.8 in 2021. He kept it at 6+ every single year. For what? And therefore, we ran up these big deficits. The deficits are all on Biden's door. Those are the facts. And you look them up if you don't want it, you don't believe me. So the peak, so let's talk about interest rates, right? Because that's a big factor. Interest rates tend to deal with inflation. They go up when inflation's high. They go down when inflation's low. And when the budget deficits are high, they go up. So let's talk about that. The peak interest rate during the Trump era was 2.5%. And for most of it, actually, it was less than 1%. Under the Biden era, the peak interest rate is 5.5%, more than double, okay? So let's just talk about the years. Trump was running, except for 1 year, which was, again, 2018. They had 1 year where the rates went up high, and the reason why they went up high is because the economic growth was so great. That's why things are so good. In 2018, the growth was so good that the Fed wanted to put the brakes on a little bit because they were worried about inflation. They went from around 1.25 up to 2.5. And then they came down. They came down almost to the end at 2020 when Trump got out, they were near 0.25. So Biden inherited this incredibly low interest rate, a relatively low deficit, high revenues from taxes, and what did he do with it? Well, he ended up blowing it all, and now interest rates have gone up every single year to where they're at 5.25 to 5.5 before they finally eased. I think they did 2.25 point reductions, so we're back down to about 4.75, somewhere around there, and those are the facts. Okay, those are the facts. Biden messed up everything Trump did. Trump had probably one of the best 4 years of economic growth, prosperity, on every single metric you can look at. Jobs, they're all in his favor. No one could dispute that, yet they keep talking like it's true. And I'm very disappointed with Scott Galloway. He's a professor. He knows better. He needs to pick his facts better, stop talking about projecting what might happen, and start talking about what did happen. Let's talk about those facts. And this really annoys me because this stuff is available. I'm not making this stuff up. You can go pull it right from the government data. They all have this stuff. This is all recorded. Every economist in the world has the same information. Every bank in the world has it. Everyone has this information because the private sector has to have it because they have to live and die off this stuff. Okay, and they can't lie about it because it makes a difference to their businesses. So only the people that can lie about this are academics and the government, politicians. Because people in the real world, they have to live with this stuff, and they know it's better to know what the real facts are so they can plan appropriately rather than talk a good game. So that's my rant, and this is the facts. Look it up, and you can see that this is baloney. The Trump years versus anybody else's years, they don't even come close. They don't come close. So that was my rant. Jen, you have anything to add? I know that was pretty much mostly just data, but...
No.
All right.
I don't know. No, you're good.
All right, so there you go. Another session. We're trying to bring the facts to you. We're trying to get to the truth. Again, I could care less whether it was Trump, Biden, Carter, Reagan. This data is the data, and that's what I live by, the data. And that's what you all should do, and stop listening to these lies. They are lies and mischaracterizations. Stop projecting what Trump's going to do. We already know what he's going to do because he already did it. And I hope that he can get it back under control. If he gets us anywhere close to where we were in the last term, we will be in great, great shape. Now, it's going to take some time because he's inherited some stuff. So, I mean, he may not get it all done in 6 months or 12 months, but I'm pretty sure when you look over a 4-year period, which is how I look at it, I don't look year to year because it's not helpful. You look over the 4-year period, or if you're there for 8 years as a president, you look over the 8-year period. And that's what we're going to do for Trump. We're going to look over 2 4-year terms, and we compare those, and we'll see how he does. And I think he'll do better. If he doesn't, I'll be sitting here calling him out. No problem. I have no issue with that. So thank you very much. Another episode. Like, subscribe, share, comment. Tell me how crazy I am, but do it nicely. And tell me if you want to hear more. Tell me if you want to hear less. And I hope everyone has a great day, a great next year, a great holiday season. And God bless all of you. Thank you.